thank y'all for having me up here again. It's been a while, but I've always enjoyed coming to this group. I believe I've been at this group before, some group in New York. And my sobriety date is July 9 of 98. So this last summer, I got 26 years. And why they call me Blind Dave, I always like to tell that story because some people feel uncomfortable or something about calling me Blind Dave. And I tell them usually, well, my home group, when I first got into AA, there were 5 Daves. So we sort of became known as Short Dave and Tall Dave and Fat Dave and Skinny Dave and Blind Dave. And so that has become my name. And it doesn't bother me at all. Sometimes some place will call me, they're going to make up the flyer for their conference or whatever. And they say, Dave, the committee asked me to call you and ask you if it's okay. I said, to put Blind Dave on the flyer. And they said, yeah. And I said, yeah, that's my name. A fellow said to me when he was visiting, and I introduced myself to him, and he said, well, I'll just call you Dave. And I said, well, then I probably won't answer because there's too many Daves. So anyway, I'm just getting started talking this morning, and so hope I don't have to clear my throat very much. So we'll get started here. In the big book, it says on page 92, it says to be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusion. It tells me to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady, talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany it. So alcoholism is a condition of body and mind. Bill said in the 12 and 12 that alcoholism wielded a double-edged sword over us. And he's referring to its physical and mental. So step one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. So we're going to talk about these conditions. We're going to talk about the physical feature first. It says any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical feature is incomplete. So in the doctor's opinion on page XXVII, paragraph 2, it says, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. So we talk about alcoholism being an allergy, and it's kind of a peculiar allergy. They were just starting, the medical profession was just starting to discover allergies back in the 20s and 30s. And Dr. Silkworth didn't exactly know what to call this feature, but he knew that it was physically driven, even though it was on the mind. So I remember I had a friend when I was a little kid. We used to run through the woods together, and I lived next to a forest, and we played in the woods. And this boy kept getting poison ivy, and I never got it. My mother said, well, I must be hypoallergenic. Well, that's a big word for a little kid. So I always went around saying, I'm hypoallergenic. And when I came into, whenever I go to a doctor's office and they give me those papers to fill out, and they ask me if I've had my childhood diseases, and they also ask me if I'm allergic to any medications, and I've always said no, I'm hypoallergenic. And so I came into AA, and this guy says, well, you see, Dave, you have this allergy to alcohol. And I said, no, I don't think so. I'm hypoallergenic. And what they mean by the allergy is that there's some component, it's a physical component, that puts this thinking in my mind. And so it affects my thinking. What I mean by that is I might stop into a place after work to have a beer or two. And after I go in and have a beer or two, I change my mind. And I reset the go. And so I'm always changing my mind once I start drinking. In fact, I like to say that actually, I think my mind changed me. So on page 22, paragraph 4, it says, we know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We're equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens, both in the body and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. It says, therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. So this allergy affecting my thinking, putting the thought there to have another drink, it becomes an obsession, and it becomes an obsession rather quickly in an alcoholic's life. It says young people may think that they can quit on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them will be able to do that because none will really want to quit. And because of the peculiar mental twist already acquired, they will find that they can't win out. So this peculiar mental twist can develop pretty early in your drinking career. So I can get rid of this physical allergy once I get detox. Some people have to go into treatment. They may need medical assistance with detoxing. There can be some pretty serious challenges with getting detox, and it may be a threat to your recovery. You may have a seizure or something. So we take them into recovery. They stay in recovery long enough. We give them some medical assistance. We help them through this detox process, and now we've got rid of the physical allergy. But once I have developed this mental obsession, yes, I can get rid of the physical driven itch for another drink. But once I have crossed this line and become a chronic alcoholic, I can never get rid of the mental itch. People say they come into recovery, they usually say their butt was on fire. And yes, it was on fire, and probably catching the rest of their life was on fire too. And so we get them in and we detox them. They can stay in for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. There's a lot of them these days. But we let them go and we say, now you're all detoxed. Don't do that again. They say, don't worry, I won't. That's what they always say when they leave. But most of them, within a reasonably short time, are going to go back out and jump back into the fire. And we have astounded society for centuries as to why do we do that? Once they've put the fire out, why do we go jump back in it? So Bill said it's truly awful to admit that glass in hand, we have warped our minds into such an obsession for destructive drinking that only an act of providence can remove it. So let's talk about the mental obsession then. On page 30, paragraph 1, where it says, most of us have been unwilling to admit that we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think that he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other men. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. So, yes, we can take them into maybe a treatment center and detox them. And yes, the obsession is weaker without the physical allergy attached to it. But one thing I can say about it is it is persistent. It's always after you. And we don't even experience cunning, baffling, and powerful until we've been sober for a while. And when it figures out that it just suggesting to me that, don't you think today would be a good day for a drink? Your wife's going to be gone for the weekend. Don't you think this would be a good chance to sneak a few drinks? All them kind of thoughts that I had early on in my recovery. After a while, the obsession figures out that I'm not going to go for that one. So it begins to come at me in other ways. It's going to hide behind some self-centered fear, and it's going to come at me that way. And if I don't learn to do my inventory and watch for those things, I don't really understand that that's a drink sneaking up on me disguised as something else. So it's always after me in one way or the other. And once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. So I like to illustrate it this way. If I'm standing before a crowd, I'm speaking into a microphone, over a PA system, and I happen to walk over a little bit to get too close to one of them speakers. Now the sound coming out of that speaker is going back into the microphone, and it creates a feedback loop. And it's going to squeal. And it's a self-sustaining loop. And it's going to squeal until I get away from that speaker, or someone runs over and turns off the PA. But something's got to break me out of the loop. And in the early days of my drinking, I could probably break myself out of the loop after a hard week, a good weekend of hard drinking. You know, come Monday is like, oh no, I don't want another drink. But after a while, once I found the morning drink anyway, solved that problem. Now my drinking begins to go on, and it might take something stronger to break me out of the loop. Maybe my wife has to give me the ultimatum. Maybe the doctor has to give me some kind of orders, or maybe the judge. But it takes bigger consequences to jar me out of that loop. And both of these conditions, the physical and the mental obsession, they're both progressive. And what that means is that over the period of time, it gets harder and harder to break out of the loop. So let's look at progression then. It says, we learned, the next paragraph on page 30, we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. All of us felt at times that we were regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. So by progression, we mean over any considerable period. It always gets worse. It gets harder and harder for me to break the loop. But it gets easier and easier for me to fall back into it. So alcoholism is a constant force. Some people think, well, I'm sober now, that I'm on top of alcoholism. No, alcoholism is a constant force, just like gravity. Gravity is a constant force. If I park my car on a hill and I think, whoa, I better pull the emergency brake here and make sure this thing isn't going to start rolling. And I pull the emergency brake, I get out of the car and I'm walking away, and that emergency brake slips off. Now the car is rolling down the hill and someone says, Dave, your car is rolling down the hill. And I turn around and I run after that car. I may catch it by the bumper, and maybe if I exert all my effort, I can maybe stop the car from rolling, and I'm holding it. Has the crisis ended? No. But the nature of the crisis has changed. The crisis was my car's rolling down the hill. Now the crisis is I'm holding the car from rolling down the hill. And if somebody doesn't come along pretty soon and get in there and pull that emergency brake, I can promise you that gravity is going to win this battle. I've just changed the nature of the problem from external to internal. I remember when I was having this debate about, am I an alcoholic or am I not? And I'm thinking, I'm controlling it. And someone said, Dave, if you're thinking about drinking, or if you're thinking about not drinking, either way, you're thinking about drinking. I went, oh God, you just encapsulated the whole situation, my life. It's either I'm drinking until I begin to think, damn this drinking. And then I quit drinking and I think, damn this not drinking. People used to say, don't go over to Dave's house, he's drinking. And then they'd say, don't go over to Dave's house, he's not drinking. In the chapter of Vision for You, it says, now and then a serious drinker, being dry at the moment, says, I don't miss it at all. I feel better, work better, having a better time. As ex-problem drinkers, we smile at such a sally. We know our friend is like a boy whistling in the dark to keep up his spirits. Inwardly, he'd give anything to take a half a dozen drinks and get away with it. He will presently try the old game again, for he is not happy about his sobriety. He cannot picture life without alcohol. Someday he will be unable to imagine life either with it or without. And he will be at the jumping off place. He will wish for the end. So it was quite a revelation to me to discover that I also have a not drinking problem. So I think of it like this way. I feel like I was living my life trapped between an oven and a freezer. And I'd start drinking and it would get hot. It'd get really hot. And I'd start banging on the door and I'd say, let me over there. Let me over there. I'm dying in this oven. And they'd say, you don't want over here, Dave. We're freezing to death in this freezer. I go, anything's better than this. Let me over there. So they'd open the door and let me through, and I'd slam the door and fall back against it. Go, oh man, this feels great. What are y'all complaining about? This is wonderful. And it did feel wonderful for a little while. And then I become restless, irritable, and discontented until I can again experience a sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. And it says, I'm going to grow restless, irritable, and discontented until. How long is it going to grow? It's going to grow until I pop. Then I'm banging on the door saying, let me over there. I'm freezing to death over here. And they say, no, you don't want over here. We're burning up over here. Yeah, I do. Let me over there. I got to get out of this freezer. So they open the door and let me in. I'll step in and slam the door and fall back against it and go, oh man, this feels great. And then pop the top back in the hood again. Can't believe I ever left my old buddies. And I'm back again. And it feels great for a little while. until I'm starting to notice that I'm burning up over here and I'm banging on the door to get back in the freezer. And as an alcoholic, that's the best I will ever achieve, is learning how to switch back and forth between the oven and the freezer. And as things grow and progress over time, it gets to where it takes a shorter and shorter amount of time for me to begin to experience the heat and for me to experience the deep cold. Alcoholism annihilates everything worthwhile in life, and it engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferer. So I'm dragging everybody that cares about me into this problem. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. The tornado is like an alcoholic roaring his way through the lives of others. It says hearts are broken. Sweet relationships are dead. Affections have been uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. So eventually, I might decide that I've got to do something for their sake. Good grief. And I become determined. I'm determined that I'm going to stay sober. For them, I got to do this. I know it's going to get pretty rough, but I'm just going to have to suck it up. I'm just going to have to hold it in. For them, I got to do this. And I'm telling the truth. As far as I know, they can look me in the eyes. It's funny. That may look y'all in the eyes and tell that you look sincere. You're telling the truth. That's how come we can always buy our way back into the house, because he looks so sincere. I believe he's telling the truth this time. But I do not realize that I do not have the ability to keep that promise. Page 24, paragraph 1. Then we're going to look here at this, the mental blank spot. This is the hopeless feature of the malady. This is why I cannot keep that promise. It says, the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We're without defense against the first drink. And I heard this paragraph many times that I went to AA thinking about, am I an alcoholic or am I not? And I'd hear somebody say, I'm an alcoholic. I'm powerless over the first drink. And, you know, like some of y'all know my story. I went to church first. And I had a significant spiritual experience there. And I was living according to the spiritual principles in church. They're about the same as AA, except for a few little differences. And it helped me a bunch. I could stay sober for a while. And during that time, I turned down many a drink. But I did not realize that it said at certain times. I finally heard that, at certain times. And I said, oh, is that what has been happening to me? Is that day came along when even my determination to beat it could not stand up. Jim, in chapter 3, Jim talks about this mental blank spot when it hit him. He said, he stopped at a restaurant to get something for lunch. He said, I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. Then I decided to have another sandwich and ordered another glass of milk. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind. It always says suddenly. The thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in this milk, it wouldn't bother me since I've got food on my stomach. So I ordered a whiskey. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. And he said, and that didn't seem to bother me. So I ordered another. And when it first stepped out, when the obsession, it tapped him on the shoulder and suggested, it probably wouldn't bother you to have an ounce of whiskey on a full stomach. Now, he had been having those little taps on the shoulder by this thought of the obsession. He'd been sober for a little while, a few months, but he failed to enlarge his program. And so one day it tapped him on the shoulder and suggested a drink, and he went for it. And he said, as he was pouring the whiskey into the milk, he said, I had a vague sense that I was not being any too smart. Vague. It says we're unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force. So we have two lines of reasoning here. We've got our insane thinking, and we also have our sound reasoning. And the blank spot occurs in my sound reasoning. And most of the days, with my willpower alone, when I'm really determined, I can slap those thoughts away. But a day is coming when I will not be able to do that. Fred says he stayed sober almost a year. They saw him a year later back in the hospital, and says we told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and agreed that he had some of the symptoms. He had this, I call it A, B, and C, the physical allergy, the mental obsession, and the progression. He agreed with all those. But he was a long way from admitting he could do nothing about it himself. He did not buy this thing about the mental blank spot. He said, I just needed to exercise my willpower and keep on guard. In this frame of mind, I left the hospital, and for a time, all went well. I had no trouble refusing drinks. So he's slapping all these thoughts away. One day I went to Washington to do some accounting business with the government bureau. I had no pressing problems. He said, my business came off well. I was pleased, knew my partner would be also. He said, I went back to the hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind, like it always has. The thought came to mind, just tapped him on the shoulder and suggested a cocktail would be nice with his meal. So he sat down and ordered one. Fred was totally blank. Jim at least had a vague sense he was doing something wrong, but Fred didn't even have that. He was totally blank. After dinner, he ordered another cocktail. And then he decided to take a walk. Now, I know what was going on during that walk. He's having this internal struggle. And he says, as he returned to the hotel, it struck him that a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. You notice earlier when he crossed the threshold of the dining room, it just sort of tapped him on the shoulder and suggested that a cocktail would be nice with dinner. But after having a couple of cocktails, now he's sweating, he's trying to take a walk, he's trying to fight this thing off. And as he tried to come back into the hotel and sneak past the bar and make it to his room, it struck him. It's not nice anymore. And it knocked him into the bar and said, a highball before you go to bed. And he had several more that night and plenty the next morning. I remember finding a friendly taxi cab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me around for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. I'd like to hear that fifth step. Thought the taxi driver was his wife. But anyway, he said, as soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that day in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I'd made no fight whatever against the first drink. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had said, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come. I would drink again. Well, just that did happen and more, for what I'd learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I'd never been able to understand people who said a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. You know, the Bible has a lot of prophecy. You know, I've got a lot of church in my history, and the Bible has lots of prophecies. And I love the prophecies. They all have come true, except for the few at the end times. And it looks like they're lining up right now, for those of you who are interested in that kind of stuff. But all these Bible prophecies, they come true to the little detail. But the big book only has one prophecy, only one. And it's just as true and just as sure. It prophesies that if I have an alcoholic mind, the time and place will come. I will drink again. And apart from a spiritual program, then that day is in your future. Page 43, the last paragraph says, once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. On that day, my defense must come from a higher power. So that brings me to step 2 real quick. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. You know, sometimes I have somebody who's atheist or agnostic, and they're real determined, you know, and they say, I just can't believe this God stuff, all that fairy tale stuff in the Bible. I just can't believe it. I say, well, you could, but you don't want to. They said, no, it's not that I don't want to. I just can't believe that. I'll say, no, it's that you don't want to. It's not a question of faith. It's always a question of will. And I can prove that. So on page 46, paragraph 1, it says, yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commence to get results. So I'll say, let's suppose that I'm out here in the woods, me and a buddy of mine, we're going deer hunting. We're in a little cabin. We got our guns broken down. We're cleaning them up. We're going to get ready because we're going to get up early in the morning, go out and get in the deer blind. And this fellow, maybe he's got some kind of a belief in God, and he's trying to share that with me. And I say, I don't believe all that stuff. I'm fixing to go lock the door and blow out the little kerosene lamp, and we're going to hit the rack, you know. And he said, well, suppose there is a God outside this cabin, and he would like to come in here tonight while we're asleep and leave you some evidence, maybe some cookie crumbs or footprints or something like that, but something for you to have as evidence to maybe begin to believe. And I could have one atheist that say, well, I don't believe that stuff, and I'm going to go ahead and lock the door. But I could have another guy that say, well, I don't believe all that, but just in case, I'll leave the door unlocked. Here's two atheists, but their attitude is 180 degrees apart. And if you'll just give God a chance, he'll leave some evidence for you. 46, paragraph 2 says, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. So I will usually ask some hard-nosed atheists, I'll say, well, can you prove to me that there is no God? And of course he can't, but he's going to try. He's going to tell me usually something about Darwin's books on evolution, the survival of the fittest, the long history, the rise, he's going to tell me all that theory, and I'll go, that's very interesting. But can you prove to me there is no God? And he'll finally just have to throw up his hands and say, no, I can't prove to you that there is no God, but you can't prove to me that there is. And I'll say, well, I'm not trying to prove to you that there is. I'm just trying to get you to admit that you can't prove that there's not. Because when you admit that you can't prove there is no God, you have at the same time admitted the possibility that there might be. And that's all I'm trying to get you to admit, is the possibility that you could be wrong. And leave the door unlocked and let God prove himself to you. Nobody can prove God to you. He has to prove himself. And he can do that. Bill Wilson was sitting at the same table drinking when Evie said, why don't you just choose your own conception of God? And Bill said, that statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I'd lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. I saw that all I needed to do is believe in a power greater than myself to build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. God will prove, he's still sitting at the same table. Nothing's changed. He's still in the same house, at the same street, in the same town. But now he said, a new world came into view. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes, and a new world came into view. I went into this treatment place. I was going out there every week, and this fellow said to me one time, he said, Dave, I'm having trouble contacting my higher power. I said, oh, you don't have to worry about contacting your higher power. It's not your job to do that. He said, it's not. I said, no, you just focus on these steps and work these steps the best you can. And if you do a good job on working these steps right, somewhere along the way, he'll contact you. And this other kid said, what if I don't believe in God? I said, well, you will then. So, I first went to church to try to get sober in 73. And it did help me. I could, until then, my best effort. I remember 3 times I made a week and a half. But after I had my spiritual experience in church, I started going longer periods, sometimes up to 2 or 3 years. But I never could completely clench the nail. It says, then he fell victim to a belief that practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink like other men. And that would always come around, that I thought, surely now I can do it. I just got to be careful not to get caught in the current and pulled away. And I never could. I didn't know about the physical allergy. And each time I hit a new bottom, I changed brands of religion, thinking there's something wrong with our theology here in this bunch. And this other group down the street swore they had more power. So I'd change churches, and I'd think this new brand of religion is going to fix me. And for a while, I seemed to be fixed. But I could never stop that day from coming around again. So I finally admitted, reluctantly, I admitted that I was an alcoholic, and I opened my heart just a little bit to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. You say, what do you mean just a little bit? Well, I was still ashamed to have to admit that my Christian faith had not healed me of alcoholism. And I was very embarrassed to have to go ask AA for added help. So I was determined to show y'all that I didn't need much help. Well, what do you mean by that, Dave? Did you get a sponsor? No, I don't think I need one of those. Did you work the steps? No, I don't think I need to do that. Well, what are you going to do? Well, I'll add some meetings into my regimen. I'll go to a few AA meetings and, with minimal participation, of course. I was determined to prove that the church could take care of it. I only wanted to get about ankle deep into AA. And me and the church would work out the rest of it. I still had a lot of religious pride, and you got to be careful for that if you're a religious person out there. So when I came to step 2, came to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Like I say, I had a problem with this thing about the first drink. I didn't even understand that until one day I read it in the big book about the first drink occurring at certain times. And I would hear people share in meetings and put that in perspective for me. And I'd say, oh, I see what you mean. And I'd read some more of the big book and I'd hear people talk about that in the meeting. I go, I see what you mean. And, I began to see myself in the big book. And one day I'm sitting in an AA meeting, having another one of my aha moments when I finally had my step 2 experience. On that day, I suddenly came to believe that the same God that I'd had for 25 years in church, who had not been able to keep me sober over there, was now going to start speaking to me in the language of the big book through the voice of other alcoholics. And I was going to hear my same old God in a brand new way. That was my step 2. When I do step 2 with a new man, it doesn't matter if he's an atheist or if he's, a very religious person. I take them both through this thing about, can you admit the possibility that you could have an experience that you haven't expected? Even the religious person, I'll say, do you believe there's an experience with God that you haven't had yet? The atheist has God in what he does not believe about God. He's got that in a box and has it locked. And the religious person has what he does believe about God, and he's got that in a box and has it locked. And I've got to get both of them to unlock that box and get ready for a new experience. Made a decision to turn our will and life over to the care of God, step 3. What I now understood, that for me, the care of God was going to come through AA. I saw that God does something very unique for alcoholics through alcoholics in a way that he can't quite do anywhere else. So I finally understood that for me, this care of God was going to come through AA. And I became willing to submit myself to that unique experience that God gives one alcoholic to another. And I asked someone if he'd be my sponsor, and I became willing to let him take me through the steps. When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. And for me, that meant I was going to keep close to this fellowship and be willing to help other alcoholics and to carry on that unique work that God does for alcoholics through alcoholics. I had a little problem with that. I thought, oh God, I knew what the primary purpose of AA was, but I had another purpose. I thought I was called to the ministry, and now it's asking me to stay in AA and get involved with AA. And I said, God, surely you don't think helping another alcoholic to achieve sobriety is more important than preaching the gospel of eternal life? And he said, no, But I got people who can do that better than you, Dave. You're an alcoholic. You can serve me best here. And with that, I became willing to stay in AA. I still go to church, but I go to many more AA meetings than I do church. And I do most of my work is in AA. And I've become willing to carry on that unique work that God does for alcoholics, through alcoholics. You know, if you'll just give him a chance, and God will make a believer out of you. And then all you got to do is keep close to this fellowship. Let God make a believer out of you as you work the steps, and become willing to carry the message. It says you can help them when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when all others fail. That's all the professional people. They all can only go so far. And we can take them that extra way. It happens that because of your own drinking experience, you can be uniquely useful to other alcoholics. You know, I was nearly 50 years old when I came into AA, and my life had been plagued with alcoholism. Even when I was in church, it still plagued me. I was cursed with this thing. I would change I'd change churches, then I'd change denominations, then I'd change towns, and everywhere I went, it always sniffed me out like a bloodhound on my trail. It always sniffed me out and took me down again. And I was cursed with it. And when I came into AA, as much as I struggled with having to surrender to AA, when I finally made the full surrender to carry on this unique work that God does for alcoholics through other alcoholics, the first miracle God did for me was he took my curse and gave it back to me as my gift. And now I am uniquely qualified to carry this message to other alcoholics. And if you're a newcomer, the same is true for you. Just give him a chance, and he'll take your cursed life and turn it into a gift for other alcoholics. So thank y'all for letting me share.